Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So I want to talk a bit about the fact that people are finally saying that 1.4 patch for Zenless Zone Zero has finally made the story of Zenless Zone Zero good. And this is very interesting to me because I have always been under the belief that Zenless Zone Zero has a good story, not just in the main story, but also the way that they handle character interactions outside of the story. For example, the little dating moments, or they're just the little interactions of seeing the characters out in the open world doing their own stuff, and then you can talk to them, and then you can trigger events and such and such. Basically, I think that the way that Zenless Zone Zero from the very start, from 1.0, has done the character interactions and the hype moments, the anime cutscenes, all of those things better than any other game, at least in the gacha game industry, and arguably just in the anime JRPG style game industry in general. So that has always been the strength for Zenless Zone Zero for me, and that has continued to be the case all the way up to 1.4. I actually even think that 1.4 introduced some more like rushed plot lines compared to the previous patches, and they could have handled the Avengers moment a little bit better, if only because the English voice acting was missing. But there are also other things they could have done. I feel like the Avengers moment could have been done a little bit better with the characters participating a little bit more, at least in the cutscenes. Maybe Fightbringer a little bit. But those are all like side criticisms. The truth is that people like Zenless Zone Zero's story when you get down to the thick of it, get down to the very core reason of why people like Zenless Zone Zero is because it doesn't burden you with a whole bunch of like unnecessary mumbo jumbo. There are very few like key terms that you need to remember. There's like maybe one or two things in the entire story of Zenless Zone Zero in the main story that I didn't get immediately. I didn't get what the fuck carrots were, and I found out that they're basically just data for like navigating hollows. And then bang boos are like a very specific thing to the story, but you very quickly understand what bang boos are intuitively because they're just like little rabbits that are around you all the time. They're like the little robot minions. And so Zenless Zone Zero is when you get down to it, a very surface level understanding required type of story. You don't need to read all these different texts. You don't need to go into all of these like artifacts to read the stories for them, like in Genshin Impact, to understand the story on a very deep level. You can do that in Zenless Zone Zero if you want to, but it's absolutely not required. It's not like Honkai Star Rail, where you have all these like different texts in the simulated universe, and if you don't read them, then you won't understand what the harmony is, you won't understand what the nihility is. And yes, you can say that you can get an understanding of that through the main story, especially in Penacony, or even the Shinjo Lofu. Those are kind of the type of places where it starts getting to the thick of the main story, which absolutely has to do with the eons. And if you don't understand what the eons are, which Belobog really didn't explain very well, that was actually one of my main complaints about Belobog, which is that on the surface level, it's a very good self-contained story, but it's actually a very bad beginning to Honkai Star Rail to explain what exactly the eons are, which if you want to understand the story of Honkai Star Rail, then you need to understand the eons. So Belobog was actually a very bad beginning to Honkai Star Rail, to introduce you to the main conflict, because it's really the conflict with Cocolia was really not the main conflict at all. It basically just introduced the Stellarons, and then the Stellarons were made into a side plot. In Zenless Zone Zero, everything building up to 1.4 was relevant. Everything about Fairy, everything about in 1.3 regarding even the side plot with the hacker guy, right? The null-face guy who was the enemy of Section 6 in 1.4's special episode, and even all the previous characters like Jane Doe, the Belobog industry guys, the Victoria, they all found some little role to play in the final storyline. And I think one of the reasons why people didn't like the story initially was because we were meeting all these factions in what seemed like very self-contained stories. We were like learning about the sacrifice in the Belobog story. It didn't feel like it was all adding up to something. But because I've been around for 31 years at this point, I know how these episodic story moments work. And because Zenless Zone Zero takes so much inspiration from movies, from TV, from all these like early 2000s to like basically like 2000 to 2008 type culture, is how I feel like everything in Zenless Zone Zero revolves around, with TV episodes, with big budget movies, that all of this culture revolves around this type of content, that it was very obvious to me that Zenless Zone Zero was based on an episodic format. And what happens in seasons of TV? Well, first it starts off with the monster of the week type of shtick, right? And then it builds up, and suddenly all of these like little individual episodes start to make sense, and they all tie up into one big final fight moment. When all these conflicts gather together into like a grand conspiracy. And that's what we're seeing Zenless Zone Zero start to do. The fact that this is happening is actually not something that has never happened before in Hoyoverse games. Obviously, Genshin Impact is doing that, but the scale on which it is taking place is stretched out a little bit more. It feels like in Genshin Impact, each region is like an entire plot line for 1.0 to 1.4 for Zenless Zone Zero. Each of these individual factions for Zenless Zone Zero is essentially a character in a region for Genshin Impact, in Honkai Star arguably as well. So it's just a different way of doing things. I feel like a lot of people were confused about how that was going to work, and it didn't feel like there was an overarching plotline, even though there was. And that's why a lot of people called it a slice of life type of story. And I don't disagree with that. I actually think Zenless Zone Zero has a lot of that slice of life, vibes. And honestly, the entire Zenless Zone Zero story is, and the setting and the way that it works is just all vibes. The way that they handle the hype moments, the anime level cutscenes, it's all vibes. And a lot of people can just live off that. Me certainly as well. Honestly, if it wasn't for the hype cutscenes, the anime style moments, I think this game would be a radically different game. But the fact that that is what it focuses on is what makes me like the game as much as I do. It's not because of the story, the intricacies of the story. The story is very much played by the book. There are not a lot of like gigantic mysteries. There are like overarching mysteries, but the focus of the game, of the story, is not on the mysteries itself. It's on the interactions between the characters and how they all culminate into a hype moment, if that makes any sense. So I just want to explain why I like Zenless Zone Zero as much as I do. A lot of people feel like a story needs to have these central mysteries as part of the main story. I think there is a difference between focusing on the mysteries versus the mysteries being part of the story. And I think mysteries being part of the story is what Zenless Zone Zero is doing, whereas Fontaine, the mystery is the story. So that is just another way of looking at things. And I just want to say, articulate a bit of why I like Zenless Zone Zero as much as I do in terms of the story, which is not to say that Zenless Zone Zero doesn't have pitfalls when it comes to storytelling. I think 1.4 actually introduced quite a bit of those that I talked a bit about in my previous video, but I think I might make a dedicated video on that in the future just to make it a bit more succinct, so to speak. Anyways, this is Bench Gamer signing out, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.